Okay, let's talk about non-verbal communication and the brain's perception and response to non-verbal communication. Because really, this is a really essential aspect of our lives, right? But we say that verbal communication accounts for around 7% and everything else is non-verbal. So this really impacts how we interact with others and how other people perceive us as well. Now, this can be from something as simple as a handshake, like a really firm handshake, or other non-verbal cues which have a really profound effect on the impressions that we make and the connections that we form. But have you ever wondered why non-verbal communication is really so powerful? Well, surprise, surprise, it's all in the neuroscience. Now, the brain, your brain, it's the command center for all of your thoughts, for all of your emotions, for all of your behaviors, and it plays a really crucial role in processing nonverbal cues. And different brain structures and different chemicals are involved in the perception and the response to nonverbal communication, and understanding these processes can help us to improve our personal and our professional performance. So let's start with the brain structures involved. We know most of these by now. You've got your amygdala, that small almond-shaped structure which is located deep within the temporal lobe of your brain. Now that's responsible for processing emotions, particularly fear and aggression, and it plays a really significant role in our response to nonverbal cues. So, for example, if we see somebody with, and this is as simple as it is, if we see them with a hostile facial expression or aggressive body language, then your amygdala, it's going to be activated and it's going to trigger your fight or flight response. Another key structure that's involved in nonverbal communication is the prefrontal cortex. So this region, which is located at the front of the brain, it's responsible for things like planning, decision-making, and social behavior. But it also plays a vital role in regulating emotions, which is really essential for interpreting nonverbal cues more accurately. So when we see of somebody's facial expression or body language, your prefrontal cortex helps us interpret the meaning behind those cues. And we take into account the context as well as our own previous experiences. So we think about, well, what's actually happening here? And in the past when this thing has happened, what's been the outcome? And that's sort of how our brain tends to think. So let's talk about the chemicals involved. Now we know dopamine, that's the neurotransmitter that, makes us feel really good, it's great with pleasure, and that plays a really crucial role in your brain's reward system. So when we receive positive feedback or we experience something pleasurable, dopamine is released, which creates that sense of pleasure and satisfaction. So in the context of nonverbal communication, dopamine is released when we receive positive feedback or when we interact with somebody who is conveying warmth and positivity through their nonverbal cues. It's very different when somebody's angry and they want to fight all the time. So when they're positive, we get this release of dopamine, which can motivate us to seek out more positive interactions, and this improves our social connections. Now, on the other hand, cortisol is a hormone that's released in response to stress, right? So we've got dopamine, which is the feel-good and the pleasure, but then we've got, on the other hand, cortisol. And cortisol gets released in a response to stress. So when we perceive a threat or when we perceive danger, cortisol is released and that triggers that fight or flight response. So in the context of nonverbal communication, cortisol can be released when we interpret nonverbal cues as hostile or aggressive. And this can cause us to feel anxious or stress, which leads to negative consequences for our personal and for our professional performance. So there are a few things that we can take away from this, and there's a few ways that we can take charge of this and we can really improve our non-verbal communication interpretation skills, and there's ways that we can do this to really boost our performance. So firstly, it's really important to be aware of our own non-verbal cues and how they may be perceived by other people. So this isn't just about how we interpret others, it's about what are we doing that people are picking up on. So for example, if we're maintaining eye contact, with somebody, this is a way that we are perceived by others. And when we maintain that eye contact, we're using open body language and we're smiling, this can convey warmth and this can convey confidence, while things like slouching or fidgeting or looking anxious, this can convey more negative messages, and this can also light up some of their mirror neurons and cause them a little bit of anxiety. Now, secondly, we can learn to interpret the nonverbal cues of others more accurately by paying attention to context and previous experiences. So, for example, somebody may be crossing their arms, right? Now, they might be doing this not because they're defensive or they're closed off, but because they're cold or they're uncomfortable. So when we take into account the context, and that context is, oh, it's a little bit cold out here, maybe they're a little bit cold and they're not closed off, but they're doing this because they are cold or they are uncomfortable. By taking that into account, we can avoid misinterpreting these nonverbal cues, and we can improve our relationship with other people. Now, finally, we can use nonverbal communication to enhance our personal and our professional connections by conveying that warmth, by conveying that positivity and that confidence. And look, this can be done really easily. This can be done through simple gestures as easy as a smile or a friendly handshake, as well as through more subtle cues like maintaining eye contact and using open body language. Non-verbal communication, it's a really powerful tool that can have a significant impact on our personal and professional performance, but we need to understand it. We need to understand that it goes into how others perceive us and it goes into how we perceive other people's. And there are things that you can do to make yourself better understood through your nonverbal communication, and there are things that you can do to understand other people to improve how you interpret and you evaluate nonverbal communication. And if we understand the underlying neuroscience behind it, that's going to go a long way to helping us put together the pieces of the puzzle so that we can create a system that's replicable and keeps us in that high performance mode. That's all for today. See you next time.